Ted Hughes, one of the giants of the 20th century British poetry, was born in Mytham Royd, Yorkshire in 1930. After serving in the Royal Air Force, Hughes attended Cambridge, where he studied archaeology and anthropology, taking a special interest in myths and legends. To read Hughes's poetry is to enter a world dominated by nature, especially by animals. While inhabiting the bodies of creatures, Hughes clambers down the evolutionary chain. He searches deep into the riddles of language, the language that reeks of the forest or even the jungle. Such poems often contain a touch, or more than a touch, of melodrama, of the brutal tragedies of Seneca that Hughes adapted for the modern stage. This video illuminates the animal poems of Ted Hughes and dives deep into the relationship between humans and animals. It is analyzed from three aspects: man's expectation to acquire animal power, animals reflect man, and enlightenment from animals. The first thing to be encountered in Ted Hughes's poetry is his preoccupation with animals like horses, foxes, otters, crow, jaguar, and deer that are included as title subjects for his poems. His poems deal with animals, nature, and the savagery of both. At the same time, he uses animals to show the beastly way of human beings. He creates in his poems the sense of both anarchy and surrealism to make clear and safe the distance between the fantasy he creates and reality. Hughes admires the positive qualities in the animals he describes because he has sympathy for the more violent and elemental human impulses. The poem Laburnum Top by Ted Hughes. In this poem, the poet uses the laburnum tree and a goldfinch as a symbol of life and its fluctuations. He describes the visiting of the goldfinch on the laburnum tree and how she has made a nest on it. Hughes is conveying a message that life is a process of exchange and transformation. People are alive because they undergo exchange of energy. The poem examines and articulates the interrelationship between soul and body through the common symbols of bird and tree. Body and soul can be separate entities, but they are absolutely complementary to each other, for one is incomplete without the other. The poem shows the states of existence both in the separation of the body and soul, in the beginning and the end of the poem. In the middle of the poem, the union is showcased, which unmistakably and unambiguously provides the body, the tree, the vigor, and the vitality mandatory for its life and its fulfillment. The laburnum tree symbolizes the pattern of our life in general. Life is seemingly dull and inanimate, but the attitude of a person towards life makes it meaningful and worth living. The goldfinch brings cheer, happiness, and mirth to the simple and inanimate surroundings. Its happiness is infectious and all-encompassing. This poem is his breakthrough, which indicates his turn from metaphysical poetry towards myth-making. It basically deals with the process of writing. At the beginning of the poem, the paper is blank, but as we come to the end, the paper is filled. In between, the speaker describes the creative process. Ted Hughes is popularly known for the use of animal imagery. The title of the poem is loaded with animal imagery, where the fox is compared with the thought process of a writer before composing something great. Both for the fox to make a move and for the thought to be released, they need silence and solitude. The measured and quick steps of the fox is the process of contemplative writing, and the use of now for 4 times focuses on the careful steps a fox takes before entering the mind of the poet. This process beautifully connotes the forming of the thought, clearer and concrete. The advancement of the fox through the snowy woods, leaving the footprints beautifully and artistically, state that the dim thought, now clear, is being printed on white paper. The blank sheet of the paper can only be printed when there is thought and imagination. So the title is The Thought Fox. The blank paper is printed, and it is the happiest moment for any poet. Now the dim and mysterious fox, which was figureless in the darkness, has attained the shape of the poem. The poem Thrushes paints a picture of birds as efficient, instinctive killing machines. The poet is observing some thrushes on his lawn. The observations lead him to contrast them to human beings, such as himself, whose best acts seem to be produced by the suppression of such energies as the birds display, and at enormous costs. The thrush is described as a terrifying bird that is almost robotic and has fierce eyes. It is ready to take its prey and rhythmically drags an innocent worm from the ground. It does not procrastinate, or is it taken over by tiredness or boredom. It simply and efficiently does what it needs to. The speaker then questions why the thrush is so efficient, whether their skulls, brains, training, or motivation to feed their loud and hungry and demanding young gives them the efficient purpose. There is no doubt or obstruction. The thrush simply does what it does. The poem then says, it is different with mankind because heroes, the everyday office pencil pushers and intricate craftsmen have all worked and shown that the act worships itself. Even though the man prays, there is a distraction that is noisy and obvious, of demons drowning out the concentration and silence. The poet sees the typical nature of humankind as a continuously frustrated search for personal integration within a civilized context, signaled by such widely divergent markers as art, heroism, and desk diary routine. Ultimately, the poet leads his readers from an apparent admiration of the simplicities of the bird to a cry that is both anguished and celebratory of the complexity of being human. The Hawk Roosting is a very powerful poem, and there is more to the poem than what meets the eye. Ted Hughes writes the poem putting himself into the body and mind of a hawk. The hawk is portrayed as an arrogant megalomaniac, and Hughes is very good at showing the way the hawk's mind works in a number of different situations and in different places. The poet represents the hawk as powerful and destructive. It's proud of its own perfection and efficiency. The hawk's attitude is egotistical and arrogant. It's omnipotent in its own eyes. The theme throughout the poem revolves around power, ignorance, and self-indulgence. The hawk itself represents power and ignorance at the same time because he thinks that he is the most important animal in the woods, and he is ignorant to the fact that he cannot have everything. In the poem, Hughes shows this very well by using lots of emotive language and description about how the hawk thinks. The poem's final stanza reads, "Nothing has changed since I began. My eye has permitted no change. I am going to keep things like this." The hawk believes he will always be superior and powerful, that he is in control of whether or not things change, and even perhaps that he is capable of living forever. This speaks to humanity's obsession with cheating both death and the natural cycles of the earth. Just as humans are arrogant and believe themselves to be indestructible and immune to nature and its changes, the hawk also believes itself to be all-powerful. The writings of Ted Hughes about animals and birds is due to the fact that he finds in them the unsophisticated vitality than urban man who is in danger of losing it. The animals which he describes try to survive the murderous attacks of man that symbolizes the attempts of beauty, passion, and natural instincts to survive in an artificial society. He is an animal poet, using animals to express his insight into the enduring spirituality of nature. Through animal imagery, he exalts the instinctive power of nature that he finds lacking in a human society, for he sees in them a clear manifestation of a life force that is distinctly non-human or non-rational in its source of power. To demonstrate the savage epic struggle between good and evil that occurs in nature every day, to portray nature and its occurrences, and to use the wildlife as metaphor for human existence. He uses animal characters.